John Gehron, what a pleasure and an honor to talk with you. We met a couple of times in passing when I was in Chicago for a short time, about 11 or 12 years ago. But yours is a name that I've known for a very long time because you are, as they say, a legend in the business, from programming to general management to executive positions. And you've just done it all. You've done it all very successfully, and you've met a lot of terrific people along the way. So thank you for your time today. Thank
Oh, my pleasure. I might have been a good disc jockey if I had your voice too.
you. Well, that was back in the day when that mattered, I suppose. You started off where I wanted to start because I look at your resume and I see, it said, I saw one website that said you started out as a program director in Philadelphia. And I went, really? You started out as a program director? But I'm suspecting that there was some on-air work that preceded that, maybe along the way as well.
Well, when I was in college, I helped pay most of my tuition by working at local radio stations around Penn State and State College. And I thought I really had made it big when I got a job on weekends over at WFBG in Altoona, which was at that time the big top 40 station.
Sure.
So I thought, boy, that's great. But then I
What
quickly
year was this?
realized that
What was the year?
what?
What year
Oh,
are we
that was in probably, let's see, 66.
Okay.
And then I thought I'd made it big. And then I realized after a while that I probably wasn't going to be that good of a disc jockey, and I should probably focus on programming and management. And that's when I got a job at Triangle Publications in Philadelphia, which was the company that owned TV Guide and WFIL, AM, FM TV, and some stations around the country. And got a nice break there doing production at WFIL FM and working with the AM disc jockeys. And then, yes, I did get a chance to be, my first programming job was at CAU FM across the street from WFIL when CBS decided to start to do something with their stations instead of just running tapes.
And that was an FM station, you said?
Yeah, an
And,
FM
and
station. We
back
did
at,
an oldies format, which
yeah,
was the first major market oldies format. And of course, I only had an AM radio in my car, so I had to go out and get one of those little FM converters that
right.
you put under the dashboard and turn your AM radio to 1600, and I could listen to my radio station.
Well, that was essentially when people were just starting to turn on to FM, right? But you had great
It
success there.
was the FCC had said you could only simulcast, I think, 25% of the time. And so all of a sudden people had to do something.
Right.
And it was great because MMR was doing I think the Marconi experiment was what they called it. And they were trying something new, and everybody was just throwing things on FM to see what would stick. And we did an oldies format. Like I say, it was first major market oldies format. And it did extremely well with a very poor automation system. But I learned something is that if you have something that people want to hear, they'll put up with a lot to listen to it because you can say it was an automation system that didn't always function the way it was supposed to, but it got the job done.
Let me hold on right there because you just said something that's very important. You said if you're doing something that people want to hear, they'll put up with a lot. And I don't know how loud you can hear, but I got a dog in the other room that's just going ballistic. I need to go close the door and shut her up for just a second. I'll be right back.
Okay.
I apologize for that.
Oh,
I'm
no
home
problem.
alone. My wife works, and the dogs are just the next door dog is barking, and Anyway, talking about automated oldies formats. That was my first programming job as well. Was at K-Earth FM in Los Angeles, and they were just starting out, and they were originally KHJ FM, but they changed the call letters to K-Earth because I think they were going to turn it into some kind of hippie trippy station with Bill Drake at the helm. But they decided to go oldies. And so there I was at age 21, programming a station that was playing songs from the 50s,
yeah,
which was my childhood, and I had no interest in the music whatsoever. But I learned very early on that that's got nothing to do with radio, really. If you're a programmer or a GM, the format isn't that important. What's important is that you know how to deal with it.
And that, that 50 music was big on the West Coast because, Art Laveau had all those oldies
Right.
but goodie albums.
Yeah,
Uh,
he worked with us. As a matter of fact, he still did a live show with us.
Terrific.
Yeah. All right. I'm sorry for the distraction there and the digression. So anyway, you moved, as I understand it, you moved from Philadelphia to Chicago.
No, oh, hang on a second. Put it on hold for a second.
Okay. I understand these little interruptions happen from time to time, but that's okay because I run a loose ship with this podcast. I just like to let us talk and let people watch the whole thing with the warts and all. Anyway, so your transition from Philadelphia was
Yeah, it went really well in Philadelphia, and so they asked me to go
oh,
to
you went to New
CBS.
York, didn't you?
I went to CBS FM in New York and put
Yeah.
the oldies format on there, and again that did extremely well because again, this is in the '60s, so and early '70s, so the format was really a 25, 34-year-old format.
Right.
It wasn't an old format like it is now.
Yeah.
Because the music hadn't been around that long, so we
Yeah.
played a lot of the '50s and obviously the '60s and into the '70s, but that went well, and then I got a chance to meet Rick Sklar. He
Mhm.
approached me after a couple of years when the opportunity at WLS opened up, and he asked me to come over, and he had this sheet of paper with all the formatics across the top, time, temperature, and all that stuff. And he says, "Kid, you're really doing it right over there." And he had marked everything down that I was doing. And of course, frankly, I learned a lot of that by listening to WABC. And so he recommended me for the job to Marty Greenberg at WLS, and that's how I got there.
It's incredible. Sorry, I lost my train of thought. This is stumbling right along, isn't it? Okay, yeah, WLS, music radio, probably. Yeah, look, I am from the West Coast, and I haven't worked any farther east than Chicago, and I was only there for 3 months. But as my knowledge of contemporary radio is pretty vast. I've been in the business for a very long time. WLS, as far as I can understand, is probably reputed to be one of, if not the number one music station in the history of the business. And you were running it at the time.
Well, what's interesting, there were three big radio stations that influenced music in America. One obviously was WABC in the East Coast, WLS in the Midwest, and KHJ in LA. But the magic of WLS was being in the middle of the country with 50,000 watts. We went all over the place. And, we did a survey one time. We had Arbitron go through all the diaries, and it came up with, we had 5,700,000 listeners over a period of a week because of the skywave at night.
Mhm.
In fact, I remember driving across the Golden Gate Bridge on vacation, and I have a rental car, and I check out WLS, and Landecker was on, and he was kind of doing some things that he knew I was out of town. So I get back. This is before cell phones, so I get back to the hotel, and I call him in the hotline, and he was kind of surprised that I could hear him out there on the West Coast.
That's great. Those were the days. That was before program directors could even dial in and listen on the phone, right? You either
That's
had to
right.
hear it, or you didn't hear it. All right. So, I want to talk to you about your perceptions of formats and the people that do the on-air work. I'd kind of like to talk a little bit about the craft itself, because as I once heard it described, he said all the top 40 stations in the country, and this is a number of years ago, but everybody's playing the same records. It's like hamburger stands. Everybody serves hamburgers and cheeseburgers and French fries and soft drinks, but the key to success is the way that you present it, the presentation, and of course the product itself. But in those days, there was an awful lot of variation in the presentation of the music. How do you decide to narrow it down? And, you know, how do you judge what your audience is going to be interested in?
Well, I think it was all about localism, and we talk about it now, but back in the day, I mean, it was localism. I mean, we did a lot of surveying of what music people wanted to hear in our market in Chicago. We called over 100 record stores a week in the beginning, and then we got into call out research. So we knew what the Midwest wanted to hear, and it was different from the East Coast, and it was different than the West Coast. There were musical differences. I always call it, we played a lot of hair band music because, that's what the Midwest wanted. That's what they liked. And the same thing with talent. Talent was crucial. I mean, I can remember listening as a kid to WLS back when Dick Biondi was on, and I would tune in every night from Pennsylvania and just to hear what Dick was doing. Obviously, I liked the music, but I liked what Dick Biondi was doing, and he was a draw. And I think that over time, we've gotten away from the music that fits the market. A lot of it's being done by, corporate heads looking at, coming up with the playlist for everybody.
Right.
And we also got away from the personalities. I used to, when I was, at American Radio Systems, and then when CBS bought us, I was head of programming for all the stations, and I'd make the rounds, and I say to the PDs, I say, if all you're going to do is let the jocks read liner cards 3 or 4 times an hour, then what's the point?
Yeah.
And I think we got away, to play more music, and a part of it was the going to the getting away from the diary and going to the meters, because obviously when we were talking and not playing music, the meters didn't record as high a listening level. And I think we got probably too sterile on the air. And I think we're starting to realize that, the advantage we have today is we're local. And in a lot of cities, there's not a daily newspaper anymore. In a lot of smaller markets, they don't have a TV station. So what's on 24/7? It's your local radio station.
Yeah.
And number 2 is, back to the personalities. If everybody has the same music, including all the digital music services, what sets us apart?
Right.
And it's the personalities. I mean, back in the 60s and 70s, you got music in 2 places. You got it at the record store and on the radio. Now you get music everywhere.
Right.
So what sets us apart? It's the personalities.
Well, there's another thing that I've been aware of for a very long time, longer than I was ever arrived in Chicago, and that was that Chicago, of all the markets in America, probably has the best reputation in terms of being able to program local radio stations, even in a major market. WGN was world famous for doing small town stuff in a huge city, not only getting away with it, but being very successful at it. And I suspect some of that has to do with people of that part of the country in the Midwest. What do you think?
No, absolutely. I think people, there's a what's the word I'm looking for? There's a camaraderie in the Midwest. People are nice in the Midwest. They go out of their way to help people in the Midwest, and I think that transfers over to what they expect from a radio station. They expect it to be their partner. They expect it to be their friend. And you listen to WGN and what they're doing even today. They're the hometown radio station. You want to know what's going on, and you want to talk about it. WGN is probably one of the best places to go for it.
I don't suppose we have to talk a lot about what happened to music radio. It was simply correct me if I'm wrong, but it was the transition technology that made it possible, it's like, what do I need a radio station for? I've got 6,000 records right here, 6,000 songs that I program. If the personality is not a personality and it's just going to read liner cards, as you said.
Yes.
And I was a little bit surprised when the technology shifted that way, that there weren't more stations going back to being a little bit loosey-goosey, letting people have a little bit of fun along the way.
Well, I think part of it was, what happened, with the finances of broadcast radio. The debt got so high, and I think people started to cut back and look for ways of running the operations cheaper because of the debt we all got in trouble with, and I think that hurt the industry a lot. But what's interesting, you just said loosey goosey and trying some things. I think that prices have come down on radio stations dramatically, and it's getting to the point where before, if you had $100 million FM station, you weren't going to fool around with it too much,
Right.
because you had a lot at stake. But now, if that $100 million radio station's worth $10 million or even less, maybe somebody can buy it and have some fun with it.
Right.
And so I think that we may start to see more experimentation, kind of like it was in the 60s when you had nothing to lose. You had to do something on your FM station or lose the license. So you just started throwing things at the wall to see what would stick. And I'm sure there's some formats and ideas out there that, that somebody could come up with and say, I'm going to put this on the radio and see what happens, because I can afford to buy it because the prices are down.
Well, yeah, what you just said reminds me of what I've been hearing from other people, Tom Langmeyer and Jack Swanson and other people that I've been talking with, saying essentially the same thing. It's like, what, there's still a future for radio, especially in smaller markets, because of that community aspect. And very often the guy that's on the air in the middle of the afternoon is a buddy of yours, so what goes around gets around. But what about the technology itself? Is the industry as we know it going to die off, or is it going to move on to some other platform?
It's hard to say. I'm certainly not the best person to try and predict the future, but clearly it's important for radio to be everywhere and be on all the devices where the listeners are. At the same time, there's a certain magic about the over-the-air signal. Number one, it's free. And number two is you don't have to worry about getting so many listeners that you overload the system. Mm-hmm. Everybody can listen at the same time, and so you can have very large audiences, without worrying about overloading the system.
The other thing that I'm having interesting conversations with people about is back in the day, and I don't remember how long ago that was, because it wasn't very long ago that I was told and heard this for the first time, and I'm talking within the last few weeks, where I said, well, but radio does what radio does best, by being live and local. And my very good friend said, well, it used to be that was what people wanted, was live and local, but now people are more interested in on demand than live and local. And to me, that just still really doesn't register, because you're right. There is something special about listening as it's happening. It's
listening as a community, absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, to me, it's like watching a football game that you've recorded versus watching one while it's playing. And, you hear the disc jockeys or whoever is on the air making references to what's going on in your world right now. They're talking about the weather. They're talking about a big event coming up, or one that just passed, and all of these things that you can relate to, that you can't relate to on a podcast or an internet radio.
Exactly. Again, radio is immediate, and it's now.
Speaking of internet radio, aren't you involved in that now somehow?
I've been helping Kurt Hansen for years with AccuRadio, and so it's interesting because I have a foot in what's going on in the digital side, and how that can, what's making that grow, what's good about it, what's not good about it, and at the same time, I'm still involved with radio because I'm part of a group that owns radio stations in San Diego. So I'm, I've got a foot in both camps, so I can kind of get a sense of where things are going.
What would you say to somebody who expressed, a young person who expressed an interest in getting into radio, or at least what we call radio? Somebody who wants to say, I think I should do podcasts, or I think I could play music and tell people a lot about the music and stuff, which I don't hear on radio even anymore. Somebody who wants to be an on-air personality, essentially. starting here in the 21st century? What do you tell them?
I think there are lots of opportunities. Again, the business needs personalities. It needs people that know how to connect with people, and not everybody can do that. And if you have that ability, I think there are still many strong opportunities for people in broadcasting. And if anything, the jobs have gotten more interesting over time because, before you just used to, as a program director, look at the music, talk to the disc jockeys. I mean, not that it was a simple job, but it's not as complicated as it is now. And so you get involved in many more things at a much higher level than we did in the past. So I think the jobs can be tougher, but also I think they can be more rewarding.
Isn't it tougher also, though, to learn your craft than it used to be when we started off at small town stations and they were everywhere? And you had people who had been working at that station for maybe a year. So he was the big grizzled veteran, he was the
Sure.
program director. And then the program director moves on and calls you and says, let's go to this bigger market together. And you're listening to other stations in various markets. And one of my fondest memories in my career is when I was 18 years old, getting off the air, and they had to throw me out of the radio station. So some of the other disc jockeys and I would get together in somebody's apartment and listen to air checks from other markets and so forth. That's where we did our learning, and we taught each other. And I don't know how people can do that now.
Well, it's more difficult. It's interesting. I remember I went to my first uh, convention, and I think it was a Gavin convention, and I don't even remember where I was, what radio station, but I'm sitting in this meeting, and they're talking about counter programming, and it was KYA talking about how they were counter programming KFRC. When KFRC was in commercial breaks, they tried to be in music. And I'm thinking, wow, I never heard of that before. And so I think that, you learn on the job, but at the same time, I think there are many opportunities for you to go to conventions and opportunities to hear what other people are doing. And like you're doing this podcast right now on Zoom. People, hopefully, if they hear this, maybe they'll pick up something and learn something, and it will help them in their career.
Yeah. Well, I think you're right. Plus, the fact is that, not only the technology, but the business itself, as true with all businesses, they all evolve, right? Things change over time. Let's talk for a moment about corporations and the deregulation that turned everybody into, as I said before, I worked for RKO when it was the biggest radio corporation in the world, and they had 13 stations.
Right.
Now, every corporation has 400 of them, and that's where they're having all kinds of financial problems and so forth. But I suspect too, and I think you hinted at it a little earlier, that that's where a lot of decisions are coming from a corporate headquarters that has no involvement with your particular town.
Yeah, I mean, I thought at the beginning that consolidation was good because it was a way to
Right.
Get people more involved, give people bigger jobs, bring more resources, spread the talent over more properties and so on. And that it did work that way for quite a while. When I was at American Radio, we put on a lot of new formats. We built up radio stations. We built great clusters. Built out new studios and everything. I mean, that's the way it was supposed to work. But it's at some point the debt got ahead of us, and so suddenly what was supposed to be a growth opportunity turned into a way to start to cut and use people more efficiently and over more radio stations so that you didn't have as many people there and so on. And so the cutting started, and I think that's when we got in trouble.
And you get program directors now who are in charge of programming 3 or 4 stations at one time in different formats.
Yeah.
It's not possible to give your all to them, I guess.
Well, I remember at WLS. I mean, I used to listen to WLS, obviously all the time, and I listened to CFL, to see what they were doing, and that's where all my focus was. And then suddenly I got, ABC gave me WLS FM, and so now I'm listening to each one half as much as I listened to one at one time, and so it does make it harder, and you're not giving it that attention. And if you're in a very competitive situation,
Right.
you need to have that attention.
Well, especially if you're essentially competing with yourself,
Yes.
two different radio stations, right? Okay, I don't. This is probably a horrible thing to ask, but I
But
just
you're
think,
going to
well,
ask it anyway.
I'm going to ask it anyway. But I that's because I have faith that you can schmooze the answer a little bit so that it works out for both of us. I just know some of the names of the people that you worked with in the past, primarily the air talent, but also people in management, other programmers, and so forth. In your career, how long have you been in the business? It's got to be 67, 60, 70 years almost.
I got my first paying job in radio in 1980 or 66.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Somebody else can do the math. It's a
Yeah.
long time. You've known a lot of people. And I'm not going to ask you for your favorites, but maybe you could just talk a little bit about some of the people that you always come back to when you think about what a great person that was, what a smart person how a person who really influenced you.
In each of the stations I've been at, there were people that influenced me. I remember when I was at WFIL, uh, Jay Cook was, who was program director at the time, was just a terrific person, not only a personality on the air, but a terrific people person as a program director. And, Long John Wade. I mean, all those people at WFIL were terrific. Dr. Don Rose became a
Right.
good friend.
He was a
And
sweetheart.
oh, just wonderful. And then I went to CBS FM, and I got to work with Bill Brown, who was already on the station, and and just was a terrific pro, and really set the bar for all the people that I brought in as we were changing format and adjusting the format. And he was a terrific talent right up until when he retired. And then I got to WLS, and that those people, obviously Lou Jack and Landecker and Fred Winston and Tommy Edwards, Jeff Davis. I mean, I'm going to forget some people because they all were wonderful, again, in their own way. And what was great at WLS was they all weren't the same. They each had what they did on the air that distinguished them from the others. Landecker didn't sound like Lou Jack. Tommy Edwards didn't sound like Bob Surratt. They all brought something unique to their shows. And my feeling was, as a program director, was I'm not going to over manage them. I'm going to give them a map and say, I want you to go from here to here, essentially, with my format. You have a lot of flexibility in how to decide to get to the end. Because that's why you're here, because you do things unique and different, and you're a personality. You're not like somebody else, and you're not cookie cutter.
And
So I've learned from people all the way. I mean, at American Radio Systems, Steve Dodge, who built the company, was phenomenal. I worked with Dave Perlman, and then Don Balukas came on, who had been general manager at WLS back when I was program director, and then went to New York, and then we hired him at American Radio Systems as we were growing. So there have been people all along the way, that have helped me and taught me.
Yeah. And you pass that on. Don't you feel kind of, I know I have a kind of a real drive to be able to pass along that information to anybody who's interested in hearing it. Although, like I say, I have been sitting in newsrooms for the last 40 years, and it used to be in those at the beginning where people in news writing and reporting business would compare notes and talk about how to present a particular story and that sort of thing, and trade copy and say, look, I think you could probably take these lines out and make it a little bit tighter, and you could do that. But you don't hear those conversations anymore. You just don't. When I arrived in Dallas, I walked into the newsroom and I started talking to people. I said, "Hey, let's talk about the craft. Tell me how you do things here. Tell me what I should be looking for and stuff." And the people look at me like I was from Mars.
Hmm.
Who's this guy and what is he talking about? We're just all kind of filling
Yeah.
spaces here. So that's lost, I think.
One of the things I loved the most was at American Radio Systems and then at CBS when Dan Mason asked me to be, head of programming, was I felt like Johnny Appleseed. I didn't go to the stations to tell them what to do. I was there to have a conversation with them about what they were doing, why they were doing it, and here are some ideas that you might find useful that some of our other stations are doing, and that was great. And by the way, Dan Mason was just one of the most wonderful people to work for. So, add him to that list of people that influenced me. By the way, I have a funny story to tell about, CBS bought American Radio. And so we're having this meeting, and we're in this meeting with Dan, all of our management from American Radio. And Dan says, "John, I want to show you something I have in my wallet." And he pulls out this little packet and he unfolds it and he says, "You sent me a rejection letter when I applied at WLS." And I thought, okay, that's it. I've lost my job. And he says, "You were one of the few people that ever replied to me and gave me encouragement to keep doing what I was doing, even though I wasn't ready for WLS." And that's the way I kind of tried to operate.
Boy, I'm so glad you brought that up. That's something that my last partner and I, Amy Shadroff, and I used to talk about a lot. Just like these days, and I'm sure this isn't just with radio, but it certainly is true with radio. You to apply for a job, you have to go online, you have to fill out a form, you hit submit, and you have no idea if anybody ever even looks at it. You assume somebody does, but you don't hear back one way or the other. And when I was a program director at a couple of stations, I considered it part of my day part of my job was to respond to those people who have applied. Thank you so much for your interest and so forth and so on. You sound terrific. I hope you'll keep learning. Feel free to contact me if you have, on and on and on, and then say, we don't have anything available right now, or, whatever. Reach out and make a little contact and give these people a little bit of encouragement. That's
Yes,
completely gone. And as I say, it's not just radio, is it?
and it seems to be in every business. Yeah, again, when I was trying to become a disc jockey, I was sending tapes out as I was getting ready to graduate from college, and I never heard from anybody. And I thought, I'm never going to do that if I'm ever in that kind of a position. And so when I was at WLS, I would, like every other week, I just shut my door and I listened to every tape that had come in those 2 weeks, and write something back to the people, and let them know I listened, and I try and give them a little thought so that they knew I listened and was serious about it.
Well, you're one of the good guys and one of the most successful. And I don't think that's a coincidence. I really don't. All the people I've known in this business and elsewhere. I'm gonna let you go, John. I know you have other things that you need to do today, and frankly, so do I. But what a great treat this was to talk with you. I really do appreciate your time.
And vice versa. It was a thrill working for you in Chicago for that period, as short as it was. So that's great to see again.
I love that city. It still hurts to have had to leave when I did.
Yes.
We'll go into all that, but that is just one of the greatest cities in the world, bar none. And I wish you lots of luck with your winter that's just getting started.
Yeah, I know. It's snowing out there right now here. So again, thanks for including me in what you're doing.
I'll let you know when this is up.
All right. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, John. Bye.
Okay, Dave. Bye.